VCY America presents Crosstalk, a nationwide call-in program discussing issues that have an effect on our families, our communities, our churches, our nation, and our world. Crosstalk, an opportunity for you to voice your concerns for biblical principles. And now live by satellite and around the world on the internet at vcyamerica.org. Here is today's Crosstalk.
Well, thank you, Gordon, and welcome to Crosstalk today. We have got some interesting stuff, as always, to talk about. But today is a stem winder, let me tell you, because there's a lot of people that are deeply concerned about what is called, the term is called executive orders. I don't know if that, if an executive order, you understand what it is. It means that the President of the United States can simply, without an act of Congress, can declare something as to existing. Now, executive orders, of course, have their limitations, but they also have been, in many cases, stretched beyond the realms of understanding. But the issue we're going to be talking about today, well, let me share with you an article that is from Daisy Luther. She says, very quietly on February 16th, President Obama signed an executive order called the National Defense Resources Preparedness Order. And like every other act or order passed of late, the name is completely misleading piece of information. And what they are saying, or what the writer is saying, it should be called the "we can take anything from anyone at any time" order, because that is exactly what it boils down to, says the writer. Now, the general function of the act is this: executive departments and agencies responsible for plans and programs and relating to national defense, or for resources and services needed to support such plans and programs, shall identify themselves for the full spectrum of emergencies, including essential military and civilian demand. Now, the writer says this: that means that any department of the government that is responsible for any item of service, either for the military or for the general populace, can make a determination of what the needs of the country are. That's the full spectrum of emergencies. Means that this is not specific to times of martial law. These departments, says the article, shall be prepared in the event of a potential threat to the security of the United States to take actions necessary to ensure the availability of adequate resources and production capability, including services and critical technology for national defense requirements. Now, the writer goes on and says that if you own a factory that produces something that the government needs, your factory can be literally co-opted to produce the goods required. People can be forced to work to provide these items. The article goes on. It says a committee headed up by the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano, shall serve as the integrated policy-making forum for consideration and formulation of national defense resource preparedness policy. Wow, that's a string of words, isn't it? And shall make recommendation to the President on the use of authorities under this act. Now, there are 6 governmental departments that have been delegated the authority. And it requires acceptance and priority performances of contracts and orders to promote the national defense over performance of any other contracts in order, and allocate materials and services and facilities. Now, I can look back to the days when, I'm that old. I can remember when the scrap iron drives were held. And living on the farm in the rural communities, there were pieces of old farm equipment, old trucks that were just barely running. Anything that had wheels, anything that was ironclad, whatever, was hauled to the railroad station. And I remember they had a great big electromagnet that would lift up all this iron, scrap iron they called it, and put it into railroad cars and hauled it off for the manufacture of wartime machinery. That was the Second World War. And granted, I mean, in order to have an army, there was the draft. In fact, I remember having a draft card years ago. You registered and you got a card and you were given a 1A or a 4F or whatever it was. But it was, you're on the line. The government needs you, or as the old saying with Uncle Sam looking out of that sign with his finger pointed at you, Uncle Sam needs you. And so, in those times of great distress, the needs were, well, I mean, I remember the government even put a handle on goods that you would normally buy easily, such as gasoline. Suddenly we had ration stamps. I remember buying a pair of shoes were rationed. I remember those ration stamps. I remember in order to go to the grocery store and buy sugar, it was unlimited supply, and you could only buy so much. Why? Well, it was used by the war machine to make alcohol and whatever it was designed for, but it was materials that they needed. Oh, I remember all of those elements quite well. However, I do also remember the sounds of the whistles and the horns of VJ Day and VE Day. I remember that clearly. I remember, as I told the kids up at camp, I remember hearing Adolf Hitler screaming on the radio. It was a terrible time to live, and in horror sometimes, and I'll never forget, as a little boy, we lived 4 miles from Lake Vermilion, but as there were seaplanes or airplanes that would fly in and out of the Canadian wilderness, and when you'd hear these big Radial 9 engines coming over, as a little kid, I'd run out and wonder if the Germans were coming to bomb us. We'd go to school, and I remember the newsreels that were on the screen, as it was so important for all of us little kids to be watching what was happening as the tanks were driving over people and explosions occurring, and as newsmen risked their lives to capture on 16-millimeter film the details of the Second World War. No, it's a horrible time when you think about that. And so presidential authority in critical times is understandable. But the big fear, because of the history of yes, presidential decrees under this president, there's great apprehension because some of these decrees, these executive orders, things that could and possibly should have been handled by Congress, have rang alarm bells all over our country because they're seeing a very aggressive move towards socialistic government. And so, as we see the departments that are going to be reallocated with the authority, the Secretary of Agriculture with respect to food resources, the Secretary of Energy with respect to all forms of energy, the Secretary of Health and Human Services with respect to health resources, in respect to transportation, all forms of civil transportation, the Secretary of Defense with respect to water and resources, the Secretary of Commerce with respect to all other materials, services, and facilities, including construction materials. So it boils down technically that in a given time or under government demand, that whatever they want, they get. And this, of course, has raised alarm bells among a lot of people. The secretary of each agency shall plan for and issue regulations to prioritize and allocate resources and establish standards and procedures by which the authority shall be used to promote the national defense under both emergency and non-emergency conditions. Folks, there are folk that are deeply concerned that presidential declarations or executive orders in some cases can push the envelope too far. There are those who are watching the antics, I would say, of some political factions within power that have even said these words, and they've been echoed by the press: never let a good crisis go to waste. The other day on this program, I talked about the $25 million investment of the government on these high-energy beam machines that will cause burns, second and third degree burns on people. But it's used, and of course, at the discretion of the operator, to debilitate people, perhaps even those who have come together for assembly against what they feel is unjust. And $25 million invested, but the overtones of this type of equipment so horrendous that even in the volatile environment of Afghanistan, the military refused to use them for fear of the PR effect of burning people in order to stop their public display of concern. Interesting. Of course, in fascist company, all you do is if you have rebels, you just shoot them and kill them. But the issue, again, in America, the mechanism of redress for grievance, and the issue of our government, and if corrupt government begins to function, what is the vehicle in which they can be removed? The word impeachment only means a trial, but the verdict is yet to be confirmed. Impeachment means examination. But the question is, what is the final verdict? We saw with Mr. Clinton, the impeachment process, but didn't seem to bother anybody, did it? Well, we're facing an interesting situation, folks. And, of course, what has been called a very quick, secret involvement of an executive order that was very quietly run through this past weekend. And the question is, what does it mean for all of us? What does it mean to you? And how will it affect us? The issues, of course, as we look at executive orders and who it involves. And we'll be talking about that as we come into our next segment. The names of the agencies, of course, the expansion of productivity, the capacity and supply, of course, all of this, the priorities and allocations involved in an executive order, every aspect of how will it affect our lives, the voluntary agreements, advisory committees, the employment of personnel, and, of course, the labor requirements. On and on the list of things go as I hold in my hands a copy of that executive order. It's available online, of course, at www.whitehouse.gov. Hit the / and if you want to search through Google or whatever, you can ask for the executive order. It's something, in fact, what I have is dated and date March 16, the White House, the official, or I should say the office of the press secretary. National Defense Resource Preparedness, an executive order. We'll be talking with you in a little bit, but we have more to talk about here today of reactions to this and how you might react should some of this go into place. Should your resources and assets be confiscated, if you please, taken to be used for military purposes or non-military purposes? We'll be right back.
Back to Genesis with Dr. John Morris, scientist and creation seminar speaker with ICR.
Dr. Morris, why do we get a headache if we eat ice cream too fast?
Chris, this is called brain freeze. Drinking cold liquids or eating ice cream too fast, it actually cools the brainstem and midbrains to dangerously low temperatures. If this continues, we'd die. But God has built in a safety mechanism. In essence, we get such a headache that we cease drinking the cold liquids until our brainstem warms up again and thus keeps us alive. Evolutionists think that animals evolved in subtropical areas, but when they migrated north, they had problems. Only those with the mutation which caused headaches survived. But Chris, this is just an evolutionary just-so story. A better understanding is that God designed things well to keep them alive through generations. Chris, isn't his Back to Genesis design wonderful?
To find out more about creation science, visit us on the web at www.icr.org. That's www.icr.org.
And we're back with you on Crosstalk today, talking about the executive order, the National Defense Resources Preparedness Order, put out by the President here, datelined March 16th, 2012. And, of course, the question is, what does this mean? Now, this is not a new order, by the way. This is not something that just came out of the woods. It has, in fact, been passed on from various presidents in various formats. There are those, in fact, the White House is saying this is nothing exceptional. This is nothing to worry about. The White House calls the executive order standard and routine after the web erupted here. CNS News says this: an executive order that created much online buzz over the weekend is essentially an update to existing law on disaster preparedness, which hadn't been updated to reflect the creation of, this is it, the Department of Homeland Security. A conservative national defense analyst told CNS News. Meanwhile, the White House asserted Monday that the order was not issued in order to prepare for war with Iran. See, this was a question, folks, that was raised. If all of this underscoring the ability of the White House now to lay hands on all resources necessary in times of national emergency. Well, have we not heard enough threats? Have we not heard enough rhetoric coming from Iran and others that America is the great Satan? That America is, it goes on, all of the different epitaphs that have been cast in our direction. And the question here, is there some handwriting on the wall that we may not realize? What was the need for suddenly bringing forth, in great times of peace, this interesting executive order? But here it is. Now, the White House indicated that though the numerous tweets and blogs that alleged the order threatened martial law, while another asserted that the order meant the administration was preparing to go to war with Iran. That wasn't the case, said James J. Cafarno, director of the Conservative Heritage Foundation's Center for Foreign Policy Studies. It's recognizing which responses migrate to the Department of Homeland Security under civil defense responsibility. Well, my question is this, as we watch these things happen: how comfortable are you with the issue? And how do you react with something that may not be of national security problem, but if they need your resources by something identified as critical? Just thought I'd ask the question. The interesting documents that we have on this story have come from numerous sources. Barrett Chose, who's a good friend of ours and a tremendous writer, has shared information with us. Of course, they're dealing with civil transportation. We're dealing with energy. There are a lot of people that are concerned today about what they call the smart meters that are put into your house. There's all kind of allegation as to what those smart meters can do or what information they gather. I recently had one of those installed in my house, and I asked the man as he was installing it, tell me, what does this thing do? Well, he says, the one I'm taking out is capable of reading your meter. We just drive by with a vehicle or through the power line, and we send out a code, and your little meter sends back how many kilowatts you used. And so I said, what does this new meter do? Well, he said, it kind of does the same thing. We can drive by with a vehicle, but it does limit how many kilowatts you can use. There's a header. It says you can't go beyond a certain point. But he says that header is certainly more than any average family would be using. Well, I don't have the answer on those smart meters, and there's a lot of allegation, a lot of conspiracy theories that are going around. But when we talked here a few days ago about the drones that will be starting to fly overhead in the U.S., I mean, non-military drones. These will be security drones of one kind or another, some of them flying under 400 feet or at 400 feet. drones that only weigh about 5 pounds, but they fly and they have video cameras capability. I mean, you wonder what in the world are these things floating overhead. But they have the capability, and they will be flying according to government declarations. And the drones are there. In the military, of course, they're equipped with lethal firearms. But somebody said you start drones overhead here that may look innocent, and before you know it, they may be also armed if necessary. Where's our country going? And is it any wonder when a nation shakes its fist in the face of God? Is it any wonder when we see the cursing and vile treatment of the things of God, the things that Christians hold in a reverential manner? And then we wonder why strange and bizarre things even happen with natural, devastating events. We think of the earthquakes in diverse places. We think of the tornadoes and all the violent things that are happening. The history of every time somebody does something that's aggressive toward Israel, we've seen within days and sometimes within hours a violent eruption of storm. And the question is, are we playing it close to the edge in America? Oh, as a Jewish rabbi called me from Brooklyn here not too long ago, he said, Vic, America is burning. America is in flames. And he says, I fear God's judgment. Well, we realize this, and we also realize that it's important for us as Christians to stand up for what is right, and at the same token that we do not throw out of balance the importance of our witness. It's fine if you want to sign a picket, if you want to sign a roster that says I'm against some institution or something that's being done, a petition, if you please. You're welcome to sign those things. But if you think somehow that all of our petitions and all of the things that we should be concerned about is the end of the road, no. Christians ought to uphold righteousness. But remember this, if we're Christians, we are indwelt by the Holy Spirit of God. And our concern, yes, should be to preserve and care for our loved ones, but it also, concern should be to care spiritually for a lost and dying world. And I say this as we look at the executive order thing today. And then we see what's happening within the church today. And I am not anti-church. But it is the thing that concerns me is what the church has become. And there has been apparently more interest among those within church work today of the popularity of having the crowd just filled to the back wall. To be able to have the hottest band on the platform and have the neatest technology. One church they put in $500,000, $500,000 into a sound stage, full technical operations through computers and all of the stuff. The pastor later called Brother Noah Hutchings, a good friend of mine, said, Pastor, we were wrong. We spent all kinds of money here to be contemporary and trying to be right out there on the cutting edge. But he says we have lost all of our people that were the founders of this church. The pillars of the church have gone, and the tithers have gone, and as a result, the lack of spiritual support and financial support, and he said we've had to refinance the church mortgage. And he said, Brother Hutchings, we're putting the organ and the choir loft and the hymns back into the church. But he said all the pillars are gone. And I would say this to those in ministry today. Think seriously before we follow a lot of trends. We're living in days that are uncertain. We're living in a world that needs a very clear-cut message about sin. Not just celebration. Sin. The wages of sin is death, the Bible says. And we can create a synthetic spirituality where we can be dancing and singing praises and all kinds of things that kind of makes us feel good. But I'll tell you this, there's nothing on earth that makes a person feel any better than to confess your sins to the Lord. Confess your sins and know that His forgiveness is real. And to know that as a result of His forgiveness, we have cleansing by the blood of Christ. We have eternal hope in spite of the crazy world in which we live. In spite of what may happen. You see, way back in the days of Adolf Hitler, he confiscated things too. He had the young people that were, in essence, at the training camps, and the people were confiscated into groups that would serve slave labor, if you please, to accomplish the wars that he was involved with. And the question is, should difficult times come, we don't know what's going to happen. We think of Iran and what Israel may have to do in order to protect its borders and the effect it can have on an entire world. Are we anchored in the rock? Are our feet on the foundation of God's Word and God's hope that He's given to us, that even in times of difficulty, we can look to Him? Just don't forget those old disciples. In that stormy ship, a stormy sea out there in the lake, and Jesus is asleep in the back of the ship. And these guys were well-seasoned fishermen. They knew rough weather. But they thought that they were going to perish because this was a stemwinder of a storm. But they came to Jesus in panic, and He was the one who simply quieted the storms and said, "Peace, be still." And it was those dear fishermen who saw this miraculous thing happen, and they said one to another, "What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey Him?" We're going to open our phone lines here right after the break and give you a chance to call in. Maybe you have some thoughts on what you see happening with the decree, I should say, or the executive order. Do these bother you? Are you concerned about them? How far do we respond to executive orders that may violate your faith? Never covered that, but maybe you have some thoughts on that as well. We'll be opening our phone lines, and our telephone number is 800-733-9829. 800-733-9829. It's toll-free from anywhere on the planet. And so if you'd like to call us, wherever you're listening to us, overseas or whatever, your call is most welcome. 800-733-9829. This is Crosstalk.
Most people think of Freemasonry as a secretive but benevolent fraternity. But what exactly is it? Is it more than it seems on the surface? In the handy-sized booklet, authors John Ankerberg, John Weldon, and Dylan Burrows present thought-provoking information, answering such questions as, what do the Masons teach about Jesus, salvation, and life after death? What do Masonic symbols represent? Is the God of the Bible also the God of the Lodge? Are Masonry and Christianity compatible? Can Christians join the Lodge in good conscience? The booklet provides a careful examination of Masonry compared to biblical truth. To obtain your copy of The Facts on the Masonic Lodge, send a donation of $8 or more to VCY America, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. To make your donation by phone, call 1-800-729-9829. That's 1-800-729-9829.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Our lines are jamming here, and we're very grateful for your call. Look, it does look like we have one line available yet. 800-733-9829. You might say, well, this is a kind of a complex thing. If the government is dealing with a volatile situation, we're in wartime, who wouldn't want to support whatever is needed out there? But the component that has raised a lot of concern of the readers of this information, the hearers of it, is that the Secretary, now we're talking about the agencies. I'm going to list them again. The Secretary of State, the Secretary of the Treasury, the Secretary of Defense, the Attorney General, the Secretary of the Interior, the Secretary of Agriculture, the Secretary of Commerce, Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, the Secretary of Transportation, the Secretary of Energy, the Secretary of Homeland Security, the Director of National Intelligence, the Director of the Central Intelligence Agency, the Chair of the Council of Economic Advisors, the Administrator of the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the Administrator of General Services. Now, what it's saying here is that the Secretary of each agency shall plan for and issue regulations to prioritize and allocate resources and establish standards and procedures by which the authority shall be used to promote the national defense under both emergency and, here it is, non-emergency conditions. How do we interpret this? How do you interpret this? Every one of those agencies plans the regulations. They will plan for and issue the individual regulations to prioritize and allocate the resources. Every one of those secretaries and other agencies I mentioned have that authority under this declaration, this presidential executive order. We're going to go to our telephones right now, take your calls. We're going to go to Ron in Mansfield, Pennsylvania. And Ron, you're on the air. Go ahead.
Sir, first of all, I need to double my donations to you because this is a wonderful program and information you're getting out. I'm a retired federal agent. I have a master's degree in history. And I think, first of all, you need to tell the people there is no mention of executive orders in the Constitution. Secondly, Adolf Hitler, after the Reichstag fire in 1933, he had passed the laws for the security of the Reich, and it was just like this rule by decree. There was never another free election until 1945. Mm-hmm. And the president's, I just found out about this presidential order after I came back, surprisingly this morning, was my weekly shooting practice with 8 other retired law enforcement officers, and they all listen to your program.
Oh, my goodness.
Well, and the thing is, you're on the right track. But the point is, rule by decree is not constitutional.
That's right.
Article 1 of the Constitution says the legislature, the House and the Senate, will come up with these things, and to have the president say, well, this is what these people will do in peacetime or war. Wait a minute. Where does he get his authority? It's not constitutional.
A lot of things are happening, my friend. And
I know, brother. And he's stacking the Supreme Court. If he puts a few more Kagans or Sotomayors in there, they will be a rubber stamp for this rule by decree.
Ron, thank you. Thank you for your observation, and stand firm. Give greetings to the other guys.
Oh, listen, they all listen to you, and we talked about you this morning, but we didn't know what was coming up because I checked my emails after I came back from the range. I'm going to load more shells.
What kind of a gun do you use there?
Well, a 45 automatic and a 357.
I've got a 9mm Glock. That's mine.
Keep it close before it's banned by executive order.
Thank you, Ron. Thanks so much.
Be well, my friend.
Bye-bye. Oh, my. Let's go to Sarasota, Florida, and we'll talk with Bill. Bill is online. Bill, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I'm a veteran myself, and I'm a member of Combat Veterans for Ron Paul
Okay.
And we were responding to this bill that was just signed on March 1st by Barack Obama. It was sponsored by, and surprisingly, by a former West Point teacher.
Now, the bill you're talking about, be specific, okay?
Well, this is Bill 347.
Oh, right. Okay.
This basically criminalizes protest within the vicinity of anyone with Secret Service protection.
Okay, no, that was one we talked about earlier, but I'm glad I wanted you to clarify, so we're on the same track.
We have a direct response to it because we, the members of Combat Veterans for Ron Paul, marched on the White House, demonstrated in formation in uniform on February 20th. On March 1st, this bill was signed by Barack Obama. It became law on March 8th. Mm-hmm. We intend to march on the RNC and the convention because we stand in opposition to the other three candidates other than Ron Paul. They're all members.
Okay, sir, I appreciate the comment. Our issue today was not talking about the merits of political candidates, and I respect your opinion, but at this point, again, we're talking about legislation, executive orders here, and I respect your views, sir. I thank you very much. But again, this is not a platform for promoting one person over the other, and I thank you, sir, for calling. Let's go to Milwaukee and talk with Jason. Jason, you're on the air.
Hi, Mr. Eliason?
Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Well, I just wanted to compliment you on what you said regarding the perils of contemporary worship music. I've worked with Christian music for over 20 years, and what I found is that in every church that it's ever been implemented in, ultimately, when you take the hymns and the traditional music out of churches, it not only erodes at our faith, but it erodes at our culture. And in every single church that I've ever seen where they've gone to great pains to completely make their music more contemporary, I have always seen the same reaction in the congregation. Usually the numbers go down and people don't listen as much. And
how old a person are you? Jason, how old a person are you?
I'm 35.
Okay.
So I started when I was very young, and I started in my Missouri Synod Lutheran upbringing. Mm-hmm. But, it's funny. I won't take up much of your time. I know you have many people on hold. Sure. But, in the last year, I lost actually almost everything that I own, my house, my cars, everything, hard times, that sort of thing. And every time that I hear one of the old Christian hymns that I grew up with, it always brings the most calming and reassuring things to my life. And so I just know in my heart that you really hit on something important, and I think it's very important that we watch what message we send out and how we send it out. I think there's no substitute for the traditional music that has held us through some of the best and worst times we've ever seen.
Well, Jason, and I share this with you because the reason I talked about music today is because it depicts the attitude of the church today. And I remember many years ago, back in the 70s, there was a group of young people, very zealous, had gone over, they were known at that time as the Jesus people. They'd come out of the rock and roll culture, and all they knew was that type of expression, and they were very zealous to evangelize, and they were going overseas and holding their rock concerts and things of this nature. And a couple, Mike and Mary Domro is their name, they came by and visited with me at our studios one day, just curious about what was going on, and I sat down with them, and they were literally emotionally shot. They said, "We've been all over Finland. We've been singing words that we don't even understand." They had memorized the words, but it was, of course, a religious function. But they said, "We are just physically and spiritually and emotionally shot." And so we sat down on the platform of our large television studio, which then was just a meeting room. And I sat down at the piano and began to play the song, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." And I read the words. Mm-hmm. And then I played "On a Hill Far Away Stood an Old Rugged Cross." And Mike turned to me and says, "Where in the world did you get those beautiful songs? Are those new songs?" I said, "No, they've been around for a long, long time." And he said it ministers to my heart, and ultimately I gave them the hymnal as they left that day. Because of what you're saying, we can be so involved in enthusiasm, but not true spiritual ministry of the Spirit. Yes, there's excitement in serving the Lord, but it isn't frenzy. Because the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, meekness. And when you hear some of these things, they almost sound threatening.
That's right. And it's funny that I've done music for 2 decades, but the biggest standing ovation I've ever received in performance was for Here I Am, Lord, which, of course, is a beautiful, beautiful traditional choral work.
Thank you, Jason. I'm going to have to run because we got people standing behind us there. Thanks so much for the call.
Thank you.
God bless you now. Let's go to Washington State and talk with Barbara. Barbara, you're on the air.
Okay. I just wanted to comment on a couple of things. All of the surveillance that Obama, and I will not call him president or Mr. because I don't respect him. I respect the office of president. But all of these things that he is putting into place, they could shut down the radio stations because that could be a national emergency in their opinion. They could use the thing that burns people to shut down Christian assemblies or protests at abortion clinics or protests at sodomite conventions. These things all need to be in place before the Antichrist can rule the whole world. And so, when Obama was elected, one of his minions called him the king. And I really believe that was their purpose and is their purpose. And I do believe that he plans on not giving up the presidency, either this next election or the one after that or any other time. And so I believe that they're putting these things, and maybe I'm silly, but these are the things that I believe is that he plans on continuing as the ruler of this country.
Barbara, let me just say this, that as we are watching, we recognize that even coming up on an election, if there were to be a national crisis, a war, that martial law could be declared and the president stays in power, and that, again, there are those who fear that, like the old saying goes, never let a good crisis go to waste. And let's hope that that's not the case.
His Occupy Wall Street has pretty well failed.
I got to run, Barbara. Thank you so much for the call. And from Washington State, we go to let's see, we've got about a minute left. We're going to go to the United Kingdom and talk with Robert in England. Hi, Robert.
Hi, Vic. I just thought I'd call in hearing what you've just been saying about Christian music.
Yes.
And just one very quick comment in passing that I've noticed a trend in the recordings of some of the contemporary stuff that the sound of the recorded versions of the songs seems to be getting more and more, the only word I can use is ugly. Yeah.
Well, you being a musician, and I can identify with that, even the tone of the sound of turmoil, and remember when it was, when Moses was coming down from the mountain, and if you recall, Joshua was with him, and they heard this rumbling coming down, and it was the sound of battle, they thought. Yeah. But Aaron was holding a rock concert. Thanks, Robert. Appreciate the call. Sorry we have to cut it off. Our break is upon us. We'll be back. Stay with us online, Robert. We'll pick you up on the other side, okay? Stay with us.
For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House. Our website is worldviewweekend.com. As I study Romans chapter 1 and I look at the 5 signs or 5 consequences that God is removing his hand of protection from a nation, I think I see what's happening to America more clearly. One of the things I must be careful of is the sin or desire to place my family above what God desires for my family. God may very well want my children to live in a nation that is hostile to them so that they might seek him. I have to ask myself as a father, has the materialism of our nation made our children and grandchildren more likely to seek after God? Or are they materially satisfied and have need of nothing? If God desires persecution to come to our nation, to get the attention of our children and grandchildren, and to drive them to the cross, I pray for persecution. It's better to be persecuted in this life and come to salvation through Christ than to be comfortable in this life and to be tormented in hell for eternity. For the Worldview Weekend Minute, I'm Brandon House.
And welcome back to Crosstalk. Our lines are jammed full here. We're right now talking with Robert in England. And Robert, back to you.
Hi, Vic. Well, thank you for kindly having me on a little bit more. Basically, the point I was making before we were interrupted is that recordings of songs that were around 10 years ago were comparatively listenable to, and there seems to have been a trend in the recordings that the same song recorded now compared with 10 years ago just doesn't sound as pleasant to listen to.
In plain language, ugly.
Yes, yeah.
Well, Robert, here's the thing. The song of America, the song that we think about, the song of the church, often reflects the attitude of heart. And when a nation is agonizing with the problems that we're facing and the lack of spiritual discernment and all of the things that are happening, to copy a phrase that was written by Francis Schaeffer in his book, How Should We Then Live?
Yes,
How should we live in the light of this?
Somewhere.
Robert, thanks for calling. Thanks so much. Appreciate your call. Got to move ahead. Pensacola, Florida, and Joe, you're on the air. Hi, Joe.
Hey, how you doing?
Just fine.
My mother-in-law and father-in-law are from Holland, and they're 80-something years old, and he was telling me just here recently, they come and visited me and my wife, how he had to dress up in little girl clothes when Hitler, was coming through, and he was taking all the young boys to put them in their armies. And another time he said they pulled up the boards in the bedroom and dug a hole in the bedroom floor, ground, and him and his daddy laid down in the hole, and they put the boards back on there, and he could hear the SS boots walking in the bedroom looking for them, and their butt of their guns hitting. Well, I said all that to say this is, are we any better? I just believe that America is fought. This America is a sport, and I just fear when I hear people like yourself and others preaching and teaching of what's coming and all, and I think, well, I don't want that. And then I say to myself, well, am I any better than my grandparents, or am I any better than the disciples or the prophets that were persecuted? Other countries have been persecuted. What makes us so much better that we shouldn't? That's what I think about, even though I don't want it for myself, but that's what I always think about, how we're spoiled,
Thank you, Joe. Appreciate the call from Pensacola. Moving very quickly to New Lisbon, Wisconsin. Diana, you're on the air.
Hi. Yeah, I'm calling in regards to my son had told me the other day he saw on TV on a news coverage that there had been down in the Democratic headquarters in Florida a flag put up with a picture of Obama in the middle of American flag. And I guess a color guard had seen it, a military color guard saw it, and they were going to take it down, and this woman told them to get off the property. And they said that is disgracing the American flag to be doing that. So she said, well, you better get off the property or you're going to be arrested. So then they said, you try to arrest us, we could arrest whoever put that flag up because that's illegal to do that. Mm-hmm. And she went away and she checked it out, and she came back out and she took it down.
But
so
you see it happen.
Information on that or not? But that was all I heard about it.
Well, it wasn't too many months ago that my good friend Rob Pugh from the Wisconsin Christian News was over in Detroit, and there were gas stations with the picture of Obama on. It's called Obama Gasoline, and they had his picture and selling gasoline under his name, his brand name. Now, whether this was done by an independent, but there were several stations of doing the same thing in Detroit. So are we making an individual into God? I think this is frightening stuff. Thank you so much, Diana, for that word. Salina, Kansas. Dale, you're on the air. Dale?
Yes, Vic. I'm hearing you're showing us the illegal practice of law of this president, and that is an impeachable offense. We need to impeach this man now before this election.
Well, the thing, Dale, that it has been a mystery throughout this and it's come forth from many quarters. Even it was I think it was the Russian press carried this as the mystery man in leadership in the United States, because nobody can verify or know where he came from. The people that are looking for the records of his education cannot find it, that or his wife. They're looking for a birth certificate, and they cannot verify that it's legit. They are looking at a Social Security number that allegedly came from a deceased man in Massachusetts or one of those eastern states. and nobody's got any answers, and all of a sudden these strange things are happening. And I think we need to pray for our country and pray for God's deliverance.
You have just cited one of 5 to 6 different breakings of law that this man has practiced in becoming a candidate to the presidency, as well as in his practice as a president.
Dale, I want to thank you so much for calling. We're just about time for one more call. I want to thank you for calling, Dale.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, Brad in West Allis. Brad, you're the last guy.
Hi. You mentioned Obama gasoline. Yeah, that's when you turn the pump on and nothing comes out, right?
No.
I just wanted to say that whether he has an executive order or not, do we really think he wouldn't do these things if there were a crisis? In fact, he'd create the crisis himself, even if he has to knock off a few of his own 99%ers to do it.
Well, you know something. And of course, Brad, your opinions there are expressed. But if you remember, even it was executive order by Mr. Clinton, who took certain pieces of land under control and forbid the excavation for coal or various other things. So the executive order has been used and, in my opinion, abused by other leaders as well. But the question is, how far will this one go?
Well, I don't think there's any restraints on this one. If he gets voted out, there's no guarantee that he'll leave peaceably.
Brad, thanks so much. Thanks for sharing from West Allis, Wisconsin. I want to thank each and every one of you for calling us today and sharing your heart. I don't have any answers on this executive order thing because it is such a broad spectrum thing. All of those secretaries and high-ranking people, each one capable of establishing the rules of the road when it comes to the resources they're responsible for. And if there is it constitutional? No, it's a presidential order. It's an executive order. It's not defined in the Constitution. It's kind of up for grabs. It's however you feel about it. Well, I think we have good reason to be careful. We need to pray for our country. And I want to thank each and every one of you that's been so patient today, calling in and sharing your heart. And I'm sorry we missed so many out there. Just want to say this. I know one of our networks coming up tomorrow begins, I think it's the Rejoice Network. They'll be beginning their share-a-thons. And so many of you hear us over the Rejoice Network. And we are so grateful for the Rejoice Network and other networks that are carrying our broadcast. Support your local networks because they're the ones that bring Crosstalk to you. They pay the price. They provide the airtime. We're just honored to be a part of it. Thanks for joining us on Crosstalk.
You've been listening to Crosstalk via satellite and the internet from VCY America. Views expressed may or may not be those of this station. For a CD of today's program, send a donation of $6 or more to VCY Take Ministry, 3434 West Kilbourne Avenue, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, 53208. Or download by RSS or podcast from crosstalkamerica.com. And join us again for